1. Welcome, everyone. It's Notinhalloffame.com, and we are super excited. It's another live show here where we're going to be discussing who we think should be part of the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2024. Now, we're going to be doing a very interesting debate where we're going to be looking at all the people who are not necessarily voted for in terms of the semifinalists, but who we voted for. So think of this as sort of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe multiverse, because that's really what this is. Welcome, everyone. It's Notinhalloffame.com.
Oh, God damn it.
Super
Sorry.
excited. It's another live show here where we're going to be discussing
That's my fault.
who we think should be part of the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2024. Now, we're going to be doing a very interesting debate.
Are you watching or are you lowering your volume?
Yeah, I know. My bad.
Semi-finalists. But who we voted for? Think of this as sort of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
God dang it, we're professionals here.
What this is.
There's like an echo in your room.
Sorry.
Bad joke.
Okay, now I know that part's not me. I've already closed off everything I've got.
Ted's asking if you have YouTube
Yeah,
open.
don't you have the live? You have the live clip open, Kirk. It's on a delay, so you're talking and then.
That's for the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Dang it, we're professionals here.
Well, I never said I was good at this. Whamp whamp. All right, so let's try this again, guys.
Take it from the top.
All right, take it from top. That's okay. We can sort of like make this work there from the beginning. Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kirk Buckner. I run NotInHallOfFame.com and the Fictitious Athlete Hall of Fame, the Fictitious Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the United States Athletic Hall of Fame. Specifically, what we're looking at is the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and we're really excited about this because we've been doing this for a long time, and what I say by this is we are referring to what we think should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and it's a very interesting sort of process that we've done. When I say that, it's so different than what we've just seen that just transpired today. As we're recording this, it is the day of the announcement of the semifinalists. Saying that, what are we looking at? We have done something very, very different because we have sort of like used the power of conversation. We have spoken with each other. We have come up with something that's very different. This is not to take a shot as to what sort of taken place in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Not at all. Anyone who has made it this far is one hell of a football player. And I think anyone watching this, I think anyone who may be sort of against any kind of player would say like, oh my God, yeah, this player is fantastic. And I would love to have them as part of my team, whatever that team is, for a 10-year period. But what we're doing here is we're seeing who is the great of the great, who really belongs as the super elite. And we've done something a little bit differently. If you're coming here and you're wondering, oh my God, why aren't we talking about Patrick Willis? Why aren't we talking about Devin Hester? Well, this is the third year that we've been doing this. And because of that, we've already sort of like done a little timeline of ourselves. They're already in. As far as we're concerned, we've already had this debate. We've already inducted Devin Hester into our Pro Football Hall of Fame. We've already inducted Patrick Willis into our Pro Football Hall of Fame. We've done all of that. And we are doing this all together so to look at some players who maybe you haven't thought about before. When we sort of like put together our preliminary list, and this is something I'm very proud of, and I can't wait to sort of like pass this over to the person who's going to be leading this. We were really thinking about players who are almost going to be up. We were looking at it in terms of positional value. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to somebody who I think the world of in terms of his writing. His writing's a lot better than my editing, if you look at how this all sort of opened up. Check him out at Read Jack on X or Twitter, depending on how it is. Jack Silverstein's going to take it over from here. Jack?
Thanks, Kirk. Appreciate it. Very excited for another conversation. And we've had so many that I think we really know our opinions inside and out. So it's interesting to see what can shake out. Some quick introductions. When I say your name, just wave. I'll just go around the horn with what I'm looking at. Vinny Laspanuso in the Falcons hat with the Rams background, who is a Giants fan.
Yes.
Wave, Vinny. Yep.
I know. I'm a bit of a mix of everything.
Yeah. All right. Beneath him, from Bigger Than the Game, my favorite sports podcast, Jeremy Dove, Philadelphia. There he is. Over here, the hater, I believe from San Diego, as the Gates jersey. Yep, there he is. Over here, Jeff Schlegel, my fellow Bears fan, and the man who's going to tell us about Tim McDonald. To his left, Siobhan, also Bears fan. Below him, the great Ron Katz, Broncos fan of the year. Ron, I don't know what percentage of the pie we give you for getting Randy Gradishar, for helping Randy Gradishar get into the hall. I know Randy Gradishar did 95% of the work. I'm going to say Ron did the other 5%. Over here is Chris, Packers fan, and a fellow owner of Mudbats and Bloodbats, the great Bears-Packers history book. Over here, Jose Ruiz, the great, the man, the myth, the legend, co-host of Bigger Than the Game. Over here, a man who I have learned a great deal from about how this process works, how the Pro Football Hall of Fame process works. The great Paul Lawrence, happy man now that Chuck Howley is heading in, a Cowboys fan here. Down below, someone who I've learned a great deal from about a lot of things, and especially in the trenches. That would be Pierce Comboy. Pierce is going to stay as the silent assassin till called upon, I guess. And or maybe just listening, but we all like Pierce and respect him, so hope he speaks up. And just joining us, the man, the dapper man himself, another fellow Chicagoan, Bill Carroll. Hi, Bill.
Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing?
Hey, Bill.
Well, so we, as we always do to start these, we all sent in our initial votes. So we all voted. We have a list of 25 semifinalists. These are not the same. They are our own list. This is actually our 4th year. And now that we're further along, we in the past have tried to incorporate some sort of overlap. Like these were our guys and these were their guys, and we're going to discuss them all. We're not doing that anymore. We're just going with ours. So I'm going to read the preliminary vote totals. And again, at the end of this call, we want to get to 15 finalists. So going from the bottom, and as Kirk said, these are all fantastic football players who we all respect, because our list is much different than the actual list. So if you're on this list, it's all, nothing but respect. So with 3 votes, Simeon Rice. 3 players with 4 votes, Ben Coates, Lomas Brown, Reuben Brown. With 5 votes, Rodney Harrison. With 6 votes, Sean Alexander, Tim McDonald. With 7 votes, Cornelius Bennett. With 8 votes, Willie Anderson, Jared Allen, Neil Smith. With 10 votes, Tom Nalen. With 11 votes, Ricky Waters, Dwight Freeney, Leslie O'Neill, Kevin Williams. With 12 votes, and now we're into the top 10. Vote number 11 was in that top 10. So now we're in the top 10. With 12 votes, Eric Allen, Darren Woodson. With 13 votes, Randall Cunningham, Richmond Webb. With 14 votes, Andre Johnson. With 15 votes, Torrey Holt, Antonio Gates. And I don't know how many voters we had total, Kirk. How many did we have?
Oh, we had 15.
We had 15 total voters?
So far, yes.
Well, this just speaks to how great he is. With 16 votes.
Oh, sorry,
Julius...
I got 16 then. I don't know.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know. I thought, hey, Julius Peppers, he can play inside, outside. He can block kicks. He does it all. He can get.
All right, somebody voted twice.
He played a little bit in Chicago. Vote early and often. You know what we say. So,
well, that might be illegal in some areas, though.
Yeah.
Don't you can't
with
really
16 votes, Julius Peppers. So something that our group is pretty aware of, and something that we're really focused on, is making sure that guys who are running out of eligibility are getting their due. So the 20th year players that we have here, Leslie O'Neal, Tim McDonald, and it's a tough split here because at our top 14 vote getters all have 10 or more. And then Willie Anderson and Jared Allen and Neil Smith have 8. Here are the guys who are below, but I know that we don't want to just get rid of them. Ordinarily, we just kind of get rid of some people. And the guys who we have below 8 are Cornelius Bennett, Sean Alexander, Tim McDonald, Rodney Harrison, Ben Coates, Lomas Brown, Ruben Brown, Simeon Rice. So I say we just kind of start checking our boxes. Let's not remove anybody, and let's just go as fast as we can. And so the first one that I want to talk about is pass rushers. We ended up with 6 pass rushers. I want to get us down to 3. We definitely don't need 6. The 6 that we have are Freeney, O'Neal, Jared Allen, Neil Smith, Simeon Rice. Who am I missing? Sorry about that. Freeney. Oh, and Peppers. So obviously Peppers is gonna move on. 20th year man, Leslie O'Neal. I know that Jeff feels strongly about him, and we're gonna hear from Tim McDonald. Jeff, give me the rundown real quick as you can on Leslie O'Neal. Tell me a little bit about him that doesn't include that 132 sack number.
Yeah, so I think one thing that stands out to me is when you look at Leslie O'Neal, 21 career forced fumbles, 16 fumble recoveries. We talk about positional versatility. It was one of the things that got Joe Klecko into the Hall of Fame, right? Was being a Pro Bowler at multiple positions. Leslie O'Neal was a Pro Bowler as both a 3-4 outside backer, as a 4-3 base end. When I look at him compared to somebody like a Freeney, and that's part of the purpose of the exercise, is Leslie O'Neal was, at least to me, equivalent to Dwight Freeney as a pass rusher, but he was much better against the run. He wasn't selling out to go just get the quarterback. He was relied upon in coverage. He could play the run. A quick note from a former Hall of Fame voter, San Diego Tribune writer, Nick Canepa. He was asked about Leslie O'Neal. He said he was the best Chargers defender in team history. And when Clark Judge, Hall of Fame voter, asked him to clarify, does that include Junior Seau? He said, the best defender in Chargers history. He was a 6-time Pro Bowler, top 5 in the AP Defensive Player of the Year award in 92, Rookie of the Year in 86. So outside of that sack number, it's 8 seasons with double-digit sacks. 7 of those had 12-plus sacks. As you compare him to some of the other pass rushers that we're looking at lists, like Peppers, I'll acknowledge, different level, right? When I look at Leslie O'Neal compared to Freeney, when I compare him to Jared Allen, I don't see where the distinction is that great. And in fact, I would take Leslie O'Neal as a better all-around football player over them.
Thanks, man. Looking at the other 5, we don't need to talk about Peppers. So here's someone I want to hear about. Ron, you're the Broncos man. And I posted in the Pro Football Researchers Association forum when we did our exercise where we voted for the next 5 classes. And we voted in Neil Smith. And someone on there was like, Neil Smith, are we just picking whoever? And what are we doing here and everything? But Neil Smith to me is someone who you had to be there. And the swing that you felt, the momentum of when he went from Kansas City to Denver to an already excellent, 13-3, 1996 Broncos team that was upset by Jacksonville. When Neil Smith went there, that was the move. You felt like, boy, this is something real. Ron, what did that Neil Smith move feel like in Denver or for Broncos fans?
Well, it's just a mojo. Like, you have a guy who's like a 5 technique guy who can play end and also go inside and just dominate. And it gave that defense a lot of confidence. I mean, I know his sack totals are where they're at, but he was also very dominant in Kansas City before he came to Denver. And this is a guy, I believe, who was already all-pro before he came to Denver.
Was.
So, I mean, this is someone with a consistent body of work. And I think one thing that has hurt him over the years is we've seen this with some players. If you split your career and you're not like a generational player, like a Montana, for example, when you split your career between two teams for long periods of time, sometimes you don't get as much support. But I mean, Neil Smith just dominated, and he made that defensive line and everyone around him a lot more confident.
Yep. Thank you very much, Ron. Bill, tell us about Simeon Rice. When you think about Simeon Rice, what jumps out? Because he's someone who, as I was watching Super Bowl 37, I was like, that's your MVP.
That's your MVP, right? So my knowledge of Simeon Rice goes back to being a graduate assistant at the University of Illinois, and we were recruiting him at the time. We were recruiting him. He was an upperclassman. He was in the graduating year, and then obviously we were looking at a sophomore who played on the basketball team and the football team, a Simeon named Donovan McNabb, under the legendary coach Frank Linty at Mount Carmel. And first of all, what a tremendous, we just talked about Peppers, and Peppers was one of those, you never forget watching him. Like, athletes like that don't come along very often, 25, 30 years past where you see someone like that. But Simeon Rice was close to being not quite as big, but a similar kind of athlete, a guy who could have been a very successful, maybe not professional basketball player, but could have played college basketball at a reasonably high level, was a pretty good track athlete before he stopped competing in track even. Just a tremendous natural all-around athlete. And then you saw him start to refine his art. And initially, one of the knocks on him is, we just talked about Leslie O'Neal and Neil Smith, guys who were really good against both the run and the pass. And there was some truth to Simeon Rice initially being a guy that didn't care much about his run defense responsibilities. But as he matured and as he was around winning teams as opposed to losing teams, you saw him make a commitment to improve in that area. So by the time he gets to Tampa Bay, though he may have lost just a tiny bit of his pure, ludicrous get off, but he's still in the top 6 or 7 of players I've ever seen. And just his pure get off was just, especially as long as he was, to be able to uncoil like that, insanity. But by that point, he was a reasonably good run defender, which was not always true. But the standard of excellence that they'd set in Tampa Bay was one that he met. And you couldn't just be a one-trick pony in that defense. Everyone had to have a couple different tricks. So by that point, he's a more well-rounded player. And he's, I think, a big part, you just mentioned, a big part of that Super Bowl. Even before they got to the point where he's basically shuts it down in the Super Bowl, shuts the Raiders, finishes the Raiders off, administers the coup de grace, whatever term you want to use. But even in a lot of the big games leading up to that, he's putting it into final drives for the other team, or he's taking what would have been probably touchdown drives and turning them into long field goals by getting a big time sack on 3rd and 4 that drives the team, from being close to the goal line to now 25, 30 yards away. And like I said, settling for a field goal or even knocking them out of field goal range. It was obviously a tremendous defense, but he probably saved them by himself, or not by himself, but did plays where he was the most responsible player for probably 4 or 5 plays each year that he was there that led to a big victory. And like I said, look at him in that playoff run that leads to the Super Bowl. He is a finisher, right? He's making big plays at big moments, batting down passes. Another thing he was great at was batting down passes. So he was a guy that by the time he gets to Tampa Bay is a pretty well-rounded player. I'll certainly admit that wasn't all of his career, but by the years that he's on good teams playing towards championship level, play, he's playing his best against the best teams they face. And I think that's something that stood out about him. And he was consistent. He was an extremely consistent player. He wasn't a guy that, would have, 20 sacks and then 7 sacks. He was a guy that would give you good production year after year after year after year after year. I just think that he's one of those people that people don't remember for whatever reason quite how good he was. People think, oh yeah, he was a good player, but I don't think they realize how good he was. And Simeon Rice would make so much money in today's marketplace. But just, I think one of the best pure pass rushers I've ever seen. And like I said, who became more well-rounded late in his career.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. So I think that the 0-2 Bucks, they played. Did they catch the Giants? I know that they obviously played the Eagles. And the 0-1 Bucks were still in the NFC Central with our Bears. So from an opponent standpoint, when you thought, and this is open for anybody, I want to hear from anybody. When you thought about that Bucks defense, where did you think about Simeon Rice? What about Jeremy and Jose? Where did you guys think about Simeon Rice, going into that NFC Championship game?
He was thought of, but obviously he wasn't above, for me, Sapp or Brooks or Lynch or Rondé Barber. He was known to me as just he was a pass rusher, but I do look at defensive on the D line. I care about you being great at both, stopping the run and rushing the passer. And as Bill said, Simeon wasn't really known for stopping the run, so he wasn't. You had to watch for him, but he wasn't the top name when it came to that great 0-2 Bucks defense, as far as I was concerned.
And I would disagree slightly in terms of, Brooks was 1, Sapp was 2. I think, to me, Simeon Rice was clearly 3, and then maybe it's like Barber's distant back 4, Lynch 5. And the reason I say that is in that system that he played in, the primary name of the game, the role here, was to get upfield and get after the quarterback. And I personally view him as more dynamic of an edge rusher than, let's say, Dwight Freeney was. And when you talk about his impact, I think Jack, it might have been you that brought it up, like in that Super Bowl, like we focus on Dexter Jackson, Derek Brooks taking picks back to the house, but it was Simeon Rice that was wreaking havoc all game long. Yep. So when I think about some of those Bucs teams, like when he came there, it was a difference maker for that defense. I would put him like right in the middle.
Okay.
Yes, I think the Saints guy, if I could.
Sorry. Yeah, Saints guy.
Yeah, just like when I was looking at the players who scared the hell out of me, and I said this before when we talked about Rondé Barber. Rondé was the person who scared me the most because you didn't know where he was going to come from. Simeon, for me, was scary no matter what he would do. Was he the top guy? No. But do we penalize him for being like a number 4, number 5 guy on a powerful defense? That was one hell of a defense. I know people who would play Madden just to play Tampa defense. And a big part of that was because of Simeon Rice.
Okay. So we know Pepper. Oh, yep. Sorry, Siobhan, go ahead.
I think when you think about the Tampa Bay defense, particularly the Super Bowl, Jack, and you can obviously attest to it, and I think Jose and Jeremy can also go with it. The way Simeon would go out those offensive tackles, when you think about who they had to go through in the NFC Championship and in the Super Bowl, the NFC Championship game, you have to go through Trey Thomas and John Runyon, 2 of the better tackles of that era. And then the Super Bowl, Lincoln Kennedy was one of the better if I'm not mistaken, he played right tackle or left. I'm not sure exactly where he played, but the fact that you had Simeon Rice going up against those kind of guys who were having stellar seasons, and the Eagles and the Raiders were some of the top offenses in the game at the time, the ability to shut them down in the way that Simeon played against that kind of competition really raises him up a level. And early on in the game, Simeon Rice had that sack on Rich Gannon that forced the field goal. And with the way the Raiders were going with Charlie Garner and all that, I think without Simeon Rice, if Simeon Rice was not there, Jerry Rice would not have had to wait until the third quarter to catch a first pass because they were just continuously putting pressure. Although Warren Sapp gets a lot of the credit, and rightfully so, Simeon's impact, John Madden, the late John Madden on the broadcast call, even after Derek Brooks had that pick 6 to seal the deal, he said, I would still vote for Simeon Rice as MVP. It wasn't just on the field. How about off the field? Remember, the players were stuck in Philadelphia after the NFC Championship game because the union workers got petty. They couldn't get home until late to Tampa. And the game it's not a 2-week waiting period. It was right to San Diego. So he did bed check. He did all that stuff. John Gruden mentioned it on the big broadcast of the America's game with the Buccaneers. Simeon took over Belichick. He had all that leadership quality. And to control those personalities, that says a lot about that guy. And there's not a lot of pass rushers and not a lot of people out there who can handle a lot of personalities while also playing alongside them. Normally, teammates would defer to each other. But in that moment, if you listen to what he said in the interviews leading up to it, I'll set the tone. That meant something because the Buccaneers, they were playing for far more than just playing Gruden's former team. That franchise, for all the misery they've had, one thing they've known for, defensive linemen, Leroy Selman, Warren Sapp, Simeon Rice. I'll take those three a day over a lot of pass rushers. The way they were able to play the game, that's what sets Simeon Rice apart from so many people.
All right, that is amazing. I didn't know all that stuff about Belichick. Thank you, bro. That's incredible and speaks very highly. Not to rush over Jared Allen. I think we know how we feel about Jared Allen one way or another. He also has a lot more time. So I want to move on to a few more players where I want to get some clarity. And the first one is someone who we've had in our semis. He's been in the semis now. He's in the semis right now. Real deal. Eric Allen. And it brings up a point that Jeff brought up and that Ron brought up, that it can be challenging for these players who span franchises, because Eric Allen is someone who had great years on the Saints, great years on the Raiders, and an Eagles fan or an Eagles voter might not be as inclined to talk as much about Eric Allen because half of his resume is in other cities. And I know Jose can, so I'll just hand it off to you. Tell us about Eric Allen. And I'm curious to hear about him. How do you compare Eric Allen to some of these other corners who have gone in recently? Champ Bailey and Charles Woodson. And then how do you compare him to, say, Ty Law? How do you compare him to Charles Tillman, Albert Lewis, maybe Asante Samuel? There's a range of guys. I think people see that 54 interceptions, they see the 93 season. Tell us about Eric Allen.
Yeah, and of course, Jack, and thank you for having us on. I did want to say that earlier. Yeah, I mean, in the previous episode that y'all did, I mean, y'all put out a lot of great information on Eric Allen, and you guys were right? Like, he was one of the best all-around corners in the 90s for sure. But unfortunately, he played in an era where you had guys like Deion Sanders, Rod Woodson, Aeneas Williams in the NFC, Darrell Green early on in Eric Allen's career. So he was always overshadowed because he wasn't as, he wasn't the pizzazz that Deion had, or, he wasn't returning punts like maybe a Rod Woodson was, but he was just an all-around great cornerback. And I think you mentioned it again in that previous episode where he can not only cover, he can play the run, he can do it all. And if he got his hands on the ball, he had an opportunity to take it to the house. And you talked about that 93 season, but even if you look at it, his rookie year in 88, he starts all 16 games. Who's the head coach of the Eagles at that point in time, which a lot of y'all obviously are familiar with, is Buddy Ryan, where we all know what type of defense Buddy came in Philly with, and he was playing that 46 defense, which if you're playing 46 defense, you're leaving these corners out on the island. And, Eric Allen had no problem, playing man-to-man for Buddy Ryan, and he did an amazing job. Second year, he makes first team All-Pro with 8 interceptions, and then so on and so forth. That 93 season is one of the best seasons maybe in the past 20, 30 years for a cornerback. And, everybody's talking about, this year with the Cowboys and with Bland having 5 returns for touchdowns in 93. Eric Allen had 4 of them. He broke his record. And then 12 years later, he's playing for the Raiders and he has 6 interceptions, and he's bringing 3 of those to the house, in the year 2000. So, and again, he wasn't a young guy playing at that point in time. He was still doing that. So, and if you look at, let's just say outside of Philly, what he did with Oakland, with the Raiders, and that era of Raider football, ever after that, the Raiders were, no more, like they weren't as good as that era was. And I'm not saying this because of Eric Allen, but, he helped build that culture there with the Woodson and, Rice and all of those guys that come in, and Tim Brown and everything. So, if you look at it for longevity, like, he was good as soon as he came into the league. And when he left the league, he was good. He would have played in the Super Bowl if it wasn't for the Tuck rule, you know. So again, if you want to look at Super Bowl rings, I know you're asking about some of those other cornerbacks. Do I think he's a Charles Woodson, a Champ Bailey at that level? Maybe not that level, but if you're looking at a Ty Law, I think he's very comparable to a Ty Law. If you're looking at someone
Rondé Barber,
like a Rondé Barber, and again, and I think y'all did a good job talking about Rondé Barber also. Like, he was very much a zone cover corner, you know, like did a great job in that zone. But I think if you match him up player for player, I think Eric Allen, in my opinion, is a much better player. He's a better player. And if you look at guys like a Richard Sherman, who was not in, but everybody's like, oh, he'll be in with no problem. You compare Richard Sherman's career to Eric Allen's career, if just based off numbers, I mean, it's not even a comparison. So, and if you look at that Eagles team, he was the only corner on the team. Like, name the other cornerback on those 90s Eagles teams. You know, Izell Jenkins, who Buddy Ryan called toast because he was always getting burnt. You know, you had guys like Ben Smith, Otis Smith. So, you know, it was Eric Allen. Yes, the Eagles had really strong safety play, but the other side, there was nobody there. So it was just really him on that island. So, no, I think Eric Allen, he should be a shoo-in for this year. Hopefully he gets in.
I was going to say one thing about Eric Allen. To your point about the 46 defense, it does leave a lot of single safety over the top, which means Allen didn't get a lot of help at times, which means sometimes he did give up some big plays. Like, we got to be honest there. Like, he did give up sometimes, I think, a little more big plays than you would like. But I think he redeems himself somewhat by just how much they could trust him on that island, and that those ball skills, 54 picks as a top corner, which means oftentimes they were throwing at toast. They were throwing at the other scrubs on that defense, which is why I think sometimes people are mistaken for thinking those Eagles defenses were greater than they were. Very good, but they're not all-time elite, especially statistically. But I think Eric Allen is a victim of getting overshadowed with like Reggie White and Jerome Brown on that defense, right? Seth Joyner got overshadowed on that defense as well. And yeah, I'm not sure if I would put him quite on the same level as Albert Lewis, but I don't know that the differentiation is so stark, but I would take Eric Allen over Rondé Barber personally.
Vinny, haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, here's another little fun fact. I don't know how many of you guys use, like online for approximate value and whatnot. I remember Bill saying this last year. Is it correct that Eric Allen actually is the second highest approximate value of any corner in the 90s, only behind Deion Sanders? Which I had to really look that up, but yeah, it is true. I mean, Eric Allen, if you go by that statistic, it's not Aeneas Williams, it's not Darrell Green, it's Eric Allen, just behind Deion Sanders. Now, granted, Deion is higher than Eric Allen for many reasons, even when it's weighted. But yeah, Eric Allen, if you look at people who played primarily for the 90s, it's like him, Aeneas Williams, and you have, well, Eric Allen.
That's really interesting because that's spread out over 3 teams. And we found, I'm trying to remember, Jeff, was it you and me? Were we looking at AV of the 85 Bears? And it was like McMichael was really high and Hamp was really high and Dent was really high. And it was just like, oh, because this is like, it like weights it to like the value of like the team. So when the team is better, the AV is better. But
it was
isolate. So Vinny, to your point, well, Deion obviously over multiple teams as well. But Eric Allen playing over these multiple teams, multiple systems, multiple coaches to be number 2. That's, I don't, like we were kind of like, I don't know how much stock we put into that stat when looking at that isolated, Bears where they're all on the team.
I'm not gonna say it's the end all be all, but
no, I get it. I'm just saying, like, our one complaint about that stat isn't a factor here.
Yeah.
So, I think if you're comparing them relative to the same side of the ball, right, Jack? Because part of the complaint about the 85 was it was saying Mongo had the same value to the team as Walter Payton.
That's right.
Mongo,
that's right. Yeah,
like,
that's
we
right.
all know that
it's objectively wrong.
It's just not
it.
true, right? But if you're talking about Eric Allen's adjusted value on Pro Football Reference in the 90s relative to the team that he was on and some of the studs that he played with and the number of double-digit seasons that he had there, that is representative of what he brought to the table.
Are
Oh,
we
definitely.
talking about adjusted value, or are we talking about like just approximate value?
Approximate value.
It's
Okay,
approximate value.
yeah, 'cause,
Approximate
like, 'cause-
value compared to
yeah.
everyone else. That's how it's done.
Yeah, because I
Um,
mean, just to Vinny's hat there, like Tommy Nobis, for example, has
Should be in.
right, but I mean, he has an approximate value under 80,
Yes.
which is
I don't know.
not-
I stopped looking at it because we got into that thing with Mongo and Walter, but
Yeah, no, and I just wanted to put that
I
out.
mean,
Yeah.
to be fair, there are some flaws. Like Joe Thomas is a lot lower, but to be fair, the Browns, like the Falcons, were really, really bad, and all you really had was, for the most part, Tommy Nobis on the defense, and you had George Coons on the offense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're saying, Ron?
and
All
you're
right.
right. I mean, like even when we talk to the people at Sports Reference, which Vinny, you and I have,
Mhm.
and sort of like they do sort of like look at the overall win for that.
Yeah.
So that's something that we do have to sort of like keep in mind when we're looking at a Joe Thomas with who entered with probably the lowest winning percentage of any player in history.
Yeah, at least, and I stand by this, and I know this is something right. Joe Thomas is, in my opinion, the greatest football player I ever
Sure,
saw.
but I'm just sort of like throwing that out in terms of looking at AB. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
All
Go on,
good.
Javon.
Let's keep it DB because our other 20th man is Tim McDonald. I know Jeff is dying to talk, but I want to go to Paul on this because the guy who's out ahead of McDonald is Darren Woodson. And I had some trouble with this because I grew up watching and just being like Darren Woodson. And I didn't pay as much. I mean, I knew Tim McDonald and he kind of stood out because of that 46, and I knew him obviously in Phoenix and then in San Francisco, but I didn't think about him that much. And so when Jeff came at me with like to really and Pierce as well to really like look at his numbers, I was like, golly. So what I want to know from you, Paul, is if you were running the show, you know Darren Woodson better than anyone. If you were running the show, how would you have weighed out Woodson versus McDonald in both in a vacuum and with eligibility years remaining factored in?
Well, thanks, Jack. That's a good question, but it's also a tough one to answer.
Hey, Paul.
So thanks for throwing that out my way. I mean, I think quickly we can get to the eligibility issue right up front, right? Because as we know, Tim McDonald's, this is his in terms of the official process, right? This is his last year of eligibility, right? So that factor, you put the check mark there. If you're someone who puts a lot of value and think about that aspect of the process, kudos to you. And yeah, that's something that is going to be an issue. Woodson has, I think, 5 or 6 more years on the ballot. It's interesting. You know, we've talked about this online, a bunch of us over the years, or actually maybe the last few months, are voters doing a good job or a better job, right, in getting some of these candidates moving forward in the process before they get to the end, aka what happened to Albert Lewis, where the voters just waited too long and tried to push him through and got him in the final 10 last year, but it wasn't enough. And then he falls into the abyss known as the seniors pool. And who knows, whenever players come out of that, it's a bit better with 3 a year, but still it's a bad place to end up. So the voters are aware of that. And, you know, we've talked about this, right? Some cases you can see voters making that movement forward and some of these guys and being aware of it. Other cases, they're not. I don't know what the rhyme and reason is. I think a guy like Tim McDonald, I'll let Jeff make the kudos case for him, but yeah, he's a guy who the voters should have been more aware of and should have been moving forward. They've done that to Darren Woodson. They've obviously identified him. He made it as a finalist last year, which, as Jack has talked many times, you know, once you do that and you have years left on the ballot, you're being queued up for an eventual election. Do I think he's one of the top 5 this year? No, I don't. I think eventually he will get in, as I say. I think he deserves the honor.
Let me ask you this, Paul. Let me ask you this, because we've talked about how Darren Woodson has 3 rings, but he didn't do as much in 92. He did a little bit more in 93, obviously by 95. Great. And that Dallas defense was so punishing. I mean, I always think of the 9 takeaways against the Bills in Super Bowl 27. 9 takeaways in a Super Bowl. There's no one from that defense who was just on that defense who's in. So Charles Haley is not getting in without his 49ers years. Dion is not getting in without his Atlanta and San Francisco, his 1 San Francisco year and his Atlanta years. Darren Woodson is like the one guy who was just on that team. So, Paul, as a Cowboys guy, where did you put Darren Woodson in terms of his importance on that defense? And I guess at a higher level, what made him special?
I think he played a very unique role in what you're talking about in terms of, I think, an underrated all-time defense that people don't always think about. And you're right, there's not a lot of representation of the Hall of Fame. He didn't play a big role in the first Super Bowl. He did in the other two. That's more than Deion Sanders did, actually. And he was a linebacker at Arizona State. He was drafted in the second round. He was actually, a side note, he was one of the draft picks that the Cowboys got from the Vikings in the Herschel Walker deal. But he was the team and the scouts picked up very quickly that he had a unique opportunity to move in that defense and play strong safety. This is a guy who, at his pro day, ran a 4.38. At the combine, I think it was a 4.53. 6'1", over 200 pounds. And he moved him in the strong safety. So he had a very unique key role in that defense. He retired as the all-time leader in tackles for the Cowboys, which when you think about the defense's history of that franchise, and as a strong safety, that's pretty impressive career. He had a pretty good long peak of about 5 years in that career in terms of accolades and stats. So I think, Jack, you're right in terms of recognizing those defenses, particularly the two second Super Bowls. He is a guy that needs to be acknowledged for that, and he was at that level. It was a no-name defense in many ways, but he had a key role. Some of his stats maybe don't line up otherwise in terms of the position he played. And to wrap things up real quick, he has received strong accolades and testimonies from two Pro Football Hall of Fame coaches, Jimmy Johnson and Bill Parcells. I think that carries a lot of weight to how they saw him play. And of course, they both coached him because he actually played for both of them in his Cowboys career. So I think it's a fair argument. It's a close debate. I know Jeff's going to bite and go on here, which I think is a very close, interesting debate between the two players. And I think it's sort of, looking at both of them, it's a tough issue. I think you can make strong case for both, but I think Woodson is in the conversation, no doubt.
All right, Jeff, throw the numbers out. How does Tim McDonald compare to Darren Woodson and Rodney Harrison? And I don't want you to mention chicken dances or the problems of playing in Phoenix or anything like that. Hit me with the on field.
I'll tell the story how I want to tell the story. Interceptions first. He had 6 more than Harrison. He had 17 more than Woodson. And the games played differential wasn't that great. Far more return yards than the other two of them. Higher average return yards per interception. More interception returns for touchdown than the other two. And honestly, it was equal. Like those two combined equal one Tim McDonald. More fumble recoveries, more defensive touchdowns than the other two. 56 career turnovers between interceptions and fumble recoveries. That's a turnover every 3.41 games. More Pro Bowls. He had 6 Pro Bowls versus Harrison's 2 and Darren Woodson's 5. When you look at all pro first/second team, he had 4 compared to Darren Woodson had 3 and Rodney Harrison had 3. Pro Scout Blue, I know, rated Tim McDonald as elite, that blue tier, 7 times, and red is 3, which I believe is more than both Woodson and Harrison. I think the way I look at Tim McDonald is that I do think the situation matters a little bit, Jack. And I'm not talking about the dance or anything. He spent those first few years in Arizona. If he's drafted by the 49ers in 87, he's on the 88 team as a starter, winning a Super Bowl, 89 Super Bowl, now 94 Super Bowl. So we're talking about 3-time Super Bowl champion. That's not even a question. Like, I didn't even bring up how he dominates some of the other safeties that are in, such as Steve Atwater, such as John Lynch. Give me a break. Like, when you look at the numbers and then you go back and actually watch and see the ability that Tim McDonald had in run support, but he wasn't just a in the box safety. He was great in coverage. He was a physical hitter. He was smart. He was an unassuming guy. And frankly, Jack, if I was going to bring up anything, I would say he was the inspiration for Rod Tidwell. Show me the money line and Jerry Maguire. Like, we're going to go there. We're going to go there. But it's frustrating, right? Like, I think Darren Woodson, in part, was a victim of that safety backlog that took years for the process to work through. And unfortunately, Tim McDonald had a bit too much anonymity. And I think when people are like, oh, Tim McDonald, I go back to your reaction, Jack, as I started sharing with you like the Tim McDonald story.
Right.
Like you can see like how you're changing. You're like, holy crap, like I didn't think about this guy in this light. And I look at him and I say, not only should he be in, I think he's a step above Woodson, another step above Harrison in terms of these three. And I think he's better than a number of the recent safeties that have went in. Pierce, I think, would agree.
Pierce would definitely agree.
Yeah.
There he is.
Don't run, Pierce. Now's your chance.
Stay here or else, Pierce.
Pierce can talk anytime.
I think you touched on most everything. To go back to Darren Woodson for a second, so he was a bit unique. He could play. He did play linebacker when the Cowboys would face the run and shoot offenses of the Falcons in particular. So that was kind of a unique role for him. And going back for Tim McDonald, he had a just really complete player across all the stats. Even looking at the run stuffs also. 4 tackles behind the line of scrimmage, not counting sacks. He's above most safeties. I guess that's about it.
Tim McDonald is so underrated.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say with Tim McDonald also, this was a guy that also came out of when he was coming out of college. He also was a consensus All-American back in USC. And I think another issue too with McDonald is because he sort of split his career with the Cardinals when they were going from St. Louis to Phoenix. They wouldn't even call the Arizona Cardinals, and then the Niners. As a result, he's not even in the Cardinals Ring of Honor. So I think even a result of the Cardinals not really mentioning his name, as well as the Niners not really giving much focus to him, because for a lot of fans it was on Deion. Well, at the same time, you had Tim McDonald, who was no slouch himself and was also, an All-Pro that year too. And he just a circumstance that he doesn't get enough credit that he does. And maybe, hopefully, someone from the Cardinals organization can see this and put him in their Ring of Honor, as he does deserve to be.
Yeah, I think one of my things with Tim McDonald, as Jeff was showing the numbers, is what he did with the ball in his hands. And we've heard voters talk about the importance of that. And we heard it come up with Rondé Barber with his 12 defensive touchdowns, 12 return touchdowns. I think it was 14 with special teams, maybe. And what Tim McDonald with the ball on both interceptions and fumble returns. I mean, getting in the end zone, long returns. As a Bears fan, of the Lovie era, I have a particular appreciation for the instinct and the training and the coaching that goes into even using that word. They didn't say turnovers, they said takeaways. It was an active verb. And when I look at Tim McDonald's stats, that's what jumped out to me as Jeff was like going through all this, was what he did with the ball in his hands. And that was pretty remarkable. I do think he's someone who at 20 years definitely warrants another conversation. Jose, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, real quick. I know seems like you want to move on, but I agree with a lot of what Jeff said, and even what he put in the chat. You think about that 49ers defense when they won the Super Bowl, it was a lot of Deion. Merton Hanks got a lot of pub too from, all his dances and everything like that. Ken Norton, another really big personality, got a lot of publicity for that defense, and of course the defensive tackles and all of that. Tim McDonald just went in there and solidified also that secondary with Deion, and if you look at, and I agree, I think he's head and shoulders above Harrison. I think he's over Woodson, in my opinion. Even if you look at guys who recently got in, like Leroy Butler, I don't even think it's a comparison. And Butler was a good player. And if you look at Butler's numbers, you'll see a lot more of those sacks because he was more of like an in-the-box guy. And, the safety position already shifted at that point where there was a lot more blitzing and things like that. But Tim McDonald, man, it's criminal, because again, and I really, really, really believe it's because you think about those Phoenix Cardinals, you think of, Aeneas Williams, Jake Plummer, Larry Sanders, maybe Eric Swan, like guys like that. And it's just nobody talks about Tim McDonald and all the things that he did. So I just wanted to put that out there. I love Tim McDonald too.
You also look at the corners from that time, like that time that he played, and you look at all the names that were either a first or second team All Pro each year from the Associated Press only. You have someone like Steve Atwater and Leroy Butler. Atwater.
Oh,
moving on.
We lost Vinny. That's okay. I want to move to the offensive line, but I'll say one more thing. Jeff mentioned the pro scout grading. So that's, we have All Pro, we have Pro Bowl. We kind of know where those come from. Although at Tim McDonald's time, players were still voting for the Pro Bowl. Two things jump out at me about Tim McDonald. You mentioned the scouting, Jeff. The NEA. He was getting all pros for NEA, which is voted on by players in years where he was not getting those from the press. So I think that obviously we've noted and Brian's noted that, players, they don't know everything. And I don't know. I top 100 aside, I tend to take a player's word for it. Someone who knows the game better than I do is on the field. And when players are voting you as all pro and the media isn't, and it's happening 2, 3, 4 years, I think that has to be accounted for. So we haven't done any automatic moves. I would like to move Tim McDonald up. We'll get to that later. Offensive line. We have a full-on O-line here because we have Richmond Webb and Lomas Brown. We have Steve Wisniewski and Ruben Brown. We have one center in Tom Nalen. I do hope we advance the center because, as I've pointed out, there have only been 5 modern era centers elected since 1987. There are 6 wide receivers on the semis list right now in the real world. In our world, we're doing a little bit better for centers. So I would like to hear from anyone who wants to talk. I have one person in mind, but that's okay. I want to hear from anyone who wants to talk about these 2 tackles because Richmond Webb and Lomas Brown, they overlapped. They both end their eligibility in 2027. Who feels strongly? I feel strongly about Richmond Webb. I think everybody knows that. Who feels strongly about Webb? Who feels strongly about Lomas Brown? Who feels equally strongly about both? And I'm gonna close my camera because I'm gonna go get a cord.
Yeah, you can speak.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna talk a bit about Richmond Webb because that's somebody that in our little closed group we've been talking a lot about. And I believe it was Brian who sort of put it out there. And Brian we all love Brian, but Brian will sort of be the harshest one in the crew.
Yes.
But he would say that, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, it's great to have him there for that. But he would acknowledge that at one point in time, he was the greatest tackle of his, at least of a year. When we're comparing him to other non-centers, and I just want to be very clear on that, non-centers. And I agree with Jack that we really need to be looking at centers, and I think Jeff sort of made a lot of points on that in our private group. I don't know that we can sort of come up with anybody beyond Richmond who has anything with more of a traditional stats or anything in terms of even advanced from what we know that would sort of exceed what he's done. Willie Anderson, again, I'm not taking a shot at him at all. But saying that, and Jeff has done a phenomenal job on this, stating how he has sort of been propelled based on an unverified stat. Offensive linemen are notorious for, I don't want to say notorious, it seems like such a weird word to say, but for not being self-promoters. That's just not who they are. They don't want to be known. They don't want to be exposed in any capacity. But here we have a guy who is a 7-time Pro Bowler, the first Dolphin, which, think about this for a second, to be in 7 straight Pro Bowls out of that history of that team. It's Richmond Webb. So I will sort of like put it out there that I'm slightly biased. I've gotten to know him just a little bit personally, so take that for what you will. But I do think that's something that should be put out whenever we're talking about people, because we all have a certain bias. I know that I do if I've gotten to know somebody in a good way or in a bad way. But I just wanted to put that out.
Yeah, Kirk, if I could go to the other side, and I will admit, like, Jack has done a really good job in terms of the advocacy of Richmond Webb, and like made me kind of rethink him. But as we've done that, it's also made me rethink Lomas Brown a little bit. And to your point around 7 straight Pro Bowls, Lomas Brown also made 7 straight Pro Bowls in the 90s. And one of the things that kills Lomas Brown, I think, in terms of his profile, is this unfair media narrative that was put out there in the 90s that it was Barry and nobody else, and that he didn't have an offensive line. And what I think is really striking about this is Brian's point about Richmond Webb and how much did Dan Marino's ability to avoid sacks help him? It's fair question, like fair debate point. I look at Lomas Brown and say, even though you have the media in the entire decade of the 90s telling you that this offensive line is not good, like the players voted and the coaches voted multiple times for Lomas Brown in the Pro Bowl. And then even as the 90s continued, Lomas Brown was still getting voted to the Pro Bowl every year. And when I remember watching Lomas Brown in Detroit in the 90s, and I knew he was the dude on that offensive line. I knew, like, when I watched the Lions, who were the guys that worried me the most? We all know Barry's one. Herman Moore as a wide receiver, certain. But the dude that gave the Bears all types of problems on that offensive line was Lomas Brown. And when
I would be thrilled if Lomas sort of like either one of them, frankly.
Right.
And I certainly sort of like respect, because you as a Bears fan, like obviously there's certain teams that we've seen a lot of, so like I might be like, as Vinny can tell you, I will be a big Cam Newton supporter. Then we'll worry about that another time when that sort of happens. But yeah, no, I mean, I am huge on both of them. I don't know that I necessarily have a 1A, 1B. I guess a 1A a little bit more for Richmond. Having said that, I agree with everything you just said. I really do.
Yeah, I also mentioned I do support both of them, though I should say a little pieces for them. Also going with the AV statistic, both of them are top 10 all time for weighted approximate value. You have Richmond Webb, who's number 6, and then you have Lomas Brown, who's number 9 all time.
Do you mean among offensive tackles?
Yeah, among offensive tackles. And when I look at Richmond Webb, he is someone who I think, when it's weighted, it's higher, but with Lomas, because he played 5 more years, his non-weighted AV is actually higher than Webb. But I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to mention what Scott Mitchell said recently, because Barry Sanders' documentary on Amazon was released, and I haven't seen it, but he said something like how he was blaming Scott Mitchell for why he never won anything. But what Scott Mitchell mentioned is that it's not exactly like Barry tore up his opponents in the playoffs. Barry wasn't exactly the best in the postseason. Are people going to blame that on Lomas Brown? No. Like, a big reason why Barry Sanders was what he was because of the help of Lomas Brown protecting the blind side of the quarterback. That's not a shot against Barry Sanders.
Well, but that wasn't Scott Mitchell's blind side.
Oh, I'm aware, but at the same time, I'm just saying in general, when it comes to Barry Sanders, it's not like he had no one blocking. It's same with, like, let's say the Bills. You had Joe DeLamielleure as guard that was opening up those holes for O.J. Simpson to go in. It's not a shot at any of the running backs. And you kind of look at it the inverse way, where people would say it against Sean Alexander because you had Walter Jones and Steve Hutchinson. I don't understand why in some instances we like to penalize the running back for that. And in some instances, for some players, we like to penalize the offensive lineman. In my opinion, I think both should be celebrated somewhat equally. I think Barry Sanders, as great as he was, also benefited
but
how do we differentiate?
Lomas Brown or Richmond Webb, or both?
Oh, I'd say Richmond Webb, because He sustained a more dominant peak for a shorter career. His statistical numbers are a bit higher, and he also was more dominant in terms of getting awards at a shorter period too. So I go with Richmond Wood for that reason. Nothing against Lomas Brown; he's also deserving, but I go with Richmond Wood.
Totally. Ron Cat. And this is, we don't like to do one against another, but because they're both coming up with the same year, it might come to that. Ron, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say for both of them, first off, Richmond Webb, if you look, and I'm not able to pull up the numbers, but if you look at his All Pros and Pro Bowls and basically postseason honors and compare them to Willie Anderson's, Richmond Webb was superior to Willie Anderson. Now, do I think both of them are Hall of Famers? Yes. But the other consideration with our group is with Webb, I think he's in his 16th or 17th year of eligibility. And that should factor into it. He should not fall into that seniors abyss. Last year, I'm sorry, I just dropped my microphone. Last year in our group, for the final five, all you need to know about Richmond Webb is Wayne Mabry, the famous Raiders superfan and historian. He's the one who did the pitch for Richmond Webb. That's how much he believes, someone with no dog in the fight believes in him. And finally, I would say this with Lomas Brown, and it pains me to say this regarding him, and it's happened with my team, the Broncos. If someone's own team doesn't respect its past greats, it's really hard to cascade that when you're talking about Pro Football Hall of Fame. The Lions just put Lomas Brown into their, I think, Pride
of the Lions.
Ring of Honor.
The Pride of the Lions, exactly. So, if they waited, almost 20 years after he retired, or maybe 20 years, I can't remember his last year. That's part of the issue in terms of visibility and viability.
Yes.
And the teams need to be better.
I want to read this. This is something that Pierce sent over. This was a list of a variety of offensive linemen. See, we don't have offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year. Offensive lineman is not going to get MVP, but there are a variety over the years of offensive line awards. So I want to read these to you. These are the NFLPA. This is the Players Union voting, and these are split by conference. So starting in 1988. Because Webb started in 1990. Lomas Brown was a little bit older. Starting in 1988, these are the AFC Offensive Linemen of the Year. Munoz.
Yeah.
Steve Wisniewski.
We're going to get to him, don't worry.
Bruce Matthews. And then 1993 is a tie between Richmond Webb and Dermontti Dawson. 1994 is Richmond Webb. 95, 96, 97 is Dawson. 98, 99 is Baselli. All right, so that's the AFC. Same time period. Here's the NFC. Gary Zimmerman, Jackie Slater, Jim Lachey, 2 years in a row.
Ooh.
Randall McDaniel, 2 years in a row. Willie Roaf, and then Larry Allen, 4 years in a row. So Richmond Webb on there twice, Lomas Brown not on there once.
Is that a reflection of the competition relative to the conference?
Well, I just named Hall of Famers in both conferences.
Mm.
You've got Munoz,
that's one,
and Bruce Matthews and Dermontti Dawson and Tony Baselli winning this award in the AFC, and in the NFC you've got Gary Zimmerman, Jackie Slater, Randall McDaniel, Willie Roaf, and Larry Allen winning.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think through if we're looking at the competition. It's similar.
Yeah, pick your poison. Maybe that NFC is a little bit.
I think the NFC was a little bit
tougher, but you're what's that?
When you win this way more stack. Then again, they did win 16 consecutive Super Bowls until Ron will like this. The helicopters came down.
Sure. You're still talking about, before Munoz it was Dwight Stevenson winning it 5 years in a row. That was well before Webb. But right. I'm just noting that when the NFL players were voting on an offensive lineman of the year per conference, Richmond Webb won it twice. Lomas Brown didn't win it. Now I just as we always
Yeah.
say we struggle to come up with numbers, and we just had a Hall of Fame voter tell us today that, well, offensive linemen, we don't vote for them. They don't have numbers, which is, frustrating to hear.
Yeah, sure.
Steve Wisniewski, Reuben Brown. Who can speak to these two?
I can speak about Steve Wisniewski right here as someone who, and Kirk would know this. In fact, my first ever podcast I did with him, I actually spoke so loudly about Steve Wisniewski.
Yep.
I'm close with a lot of Raiders fans, and Bill and I can say this because we speak to the people of Oakland, California, with Zenny Abraham, a very close colleague of ours, and we hear the Raiders fans, especially when they're speaking about their legendary teams of the 70s and the 80s, their dynasty, and all their Hall of Famers. And you see them mentioning and pushing for, Lester Hayes. You see them pushing for Amy Trask. You see them pushing for, of course, I know that some guys aren't big on him, Jim Plunkett even. You see a lot from those three and probably some others. And if you get anything recently, you see stuff for Tim Brown, who finally made it. You're probably going to see him a little bit for Shane Leckler. But there's one guy who I would argue was the most dominant of the Raiders during that era from like the 90s to the present, unless you talk about Charles Woodson, of course. And that person is Steve Wisniewski. This man, I have no idea why Raiders fans never mention his name at all. It's like he never even played for the team. I understand he was a guard and, he was a very, very quiet kind of a guy. But this was a man, when all said and done, was an 8-time Pro Bowler. And also an 8-time All-Pro. All-Pro, 8-time All-Pro, 2 of them first team, 6 of them second team. And you look at if you look at the official 1990s All-Decade Team guards, and granted, I'm someone that likes to look at multiple All-Decade teams, as I think only one is not enough. But if you look at the official list, you have Bruce Matthews in, Randall McDaniel in, Larry Allen in. All 3 of those guys made it very, very easily. But Steve Wisniewski, who had 8 All-Pros to his name and was even named the best offensive lineman in the AFC when he played as a guard. Keep in mind, as a guard, he was named that. For some reason, he can only be a semifinalist one time, and that happened years ago. He has gotten absolutely nothing. And during that entire time, he always played every single game except for 2 times in his entire career. And we talked about Eric Allen's final game being the tuck rule. That was the same exact situation.
Same with Wisniewski, right?
Yeah, they were teammates at the very, very end, and they retired after that season. So you have 2 guys but Wisniewski played his entire career with the Raiders, and he even came back in 2011 to be their assistant offensive line coach. So this is a team that was a Raider for his entire career. A guy who I think should be in the Texas Hall of Fame soon because he grew up in Houston, actually. Don't worry, that'll come down the line. He'll join Roy down the road. But this is a guy that has gotten literally no buzz at all from the fan base and the team. Like, the team almost doesn't even acknowledge he existed. And unfortunately, because the Raiders don't have a ring of honor, or they don't retire numbers, I mean, it works out with the Cowboys, not so much with Atlanta right here, but the Raiders don't have any ring of honor or retired number system. And as a result, teams that get people that are not associated with the fan base, like a Lester Hayes or a Jim Plunkett, who do get a lot of attention because they were also part of those teams. Wisniewski, who wasn't, gets no buzz. And it's a real shame. The guy was an absolute menace on the field. You also look at how he was as guard. He's 18th all time in terms of Hall of Fame metric. And if you look at weighted average, there's only three guards like him with a weighted average higher than that's Jari Evans with 114, and Logan Mankins also 102, along with Steve Wisniewski. These are guys he has a higher weighted average than approximate value than. Zach Martin Marshall Yonda, two guys that people see as surefire Hall of Famers, and also way above Bob Kuchenberg, who we think very strongly is a Hall of Famer as well. So when you have a guy who has a higher, who is better, statistically better than like half of the guards already in Canton, how come a guy like that gets literally no attention? Like,
I think you answered that though, Ben, because like you and I have talked about that before.
Yeah.
Even when I talked about with Wayne, the super fan, he hates that
Hall
term.
of Fame super fan.
Hall of Fame fan, yeah, Hall of Fame, the violator. So
he's in the black hole. I mean,
Yep.
Yeah.
But essentially, he was one of those guys in that glory period, but he didn't win a Super Bowl, and so there's not that push. I mean, they will push harder for a Jim Plunkett, who.
I mean, he has demand like that.
Sure,
that's
but I mean, like you and I can both agree, and we have.
Oh yeah, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer either.
Right, but he's got that. But anyway, go on.
Okay, to the point about like Wisniewski versus Ruben
Brown, yeah.
Like I think about it, there's some similarity in terms of accolades. In terms of what was Ruben? Jack was a 9-time Pro Bowler.
9-time Pro Bowler.
And then eight consecutive.
Yeah, and then Wisniewski was an 8-time Pro Bowler. I want to represent Brian's viewpoint at least on Wiz a little bit in terms of Wisniewski could make some of those big spectacular blocks, and that's kind of how I remember him too from the 90s. But sometimes he would execute as well on the more fundamental stuff. So we would get like the highlight attention grabbers and would miss some of the more basic assignments. I think I would still put him a little bit ahead of Ruben Brown personally, because I think of Ruben Brown was a little more penalty prone. And I know, Jack, you and I probably disagree on this, but when I think about the Bears offensive line, and granted, I know this was later in Ruben Brown's career, I think of Olin Kreutz before I think of Ruben Brown. I didn't think Ruben Brown was the best on that offensive line. And at times I thought he was a little suspect and vulnerable in the middle.
Ruben Brown's thing was that he came to that team and he was one of those guys who had a certain credibility and authority to him, where he was the perennial Pro Bowler in Buffalo.
Right.
He wasn't on the Super Bowl teams, but he had like that whiff of it because of the guys who he played with. And when he came to the Bears, it was like, oh my gosh, we got Ruben Brown. And I've talked to a number of those players. I've talked to Olin. I've talked to Pat Manley. I've talked to Garza. And they all talk about what Ruben Brown meant to that team from a leadership standpoint. Right. Their big breakdown cheer, Space Mountain. I mean, my thing with Ruben Brown, Wisniewski, if these guys were wide receivers, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. I mean, it would be they're in. I mean, I don't see a reason, and I would love I don't see a reason why you have to go much farther than the fact that Steve Wisniewski, 8-time All-Pro. Eight times he's one of the top 4 guards in the NFL. That's how I view it. I want to get to some other players before we wrap it up. And I think if Evan were here, shout out to Evan, he would be telling us all about Kevin Williams. I don't think anybody supports Kevin Williams more than we do, but just for the people listening, Chris, Packers man, Vikings, tell us a little bit about Kevin Williams.
Yeah, so I mean, Kevin Williams was one of the man in the middle with Pat Williams, the Williams brothers, and they really did a lot of the work that allowed Jared Allen to accumulate the numbers he did. Kevin Williams was I think a 5-time All-Pro, multiple Pro Bowls as well, and it's really kind of mind-boggling that he has not received any traction from the voters based on just his postseason accolades, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's bizarre, and I know that they say interior guys don't have the big numbers. Kevin Williams, 63 career sacks. I know we love Michael Dean Perry in this group, 61. How about Cortez Kennedy, 58. How about Richard Seymour, 57.5? How about Dan Hampton, 57? How about Randy White, 52? Sacks aren't everything. It's not the totality, but it baffles the mind that he's, with those numbers, with the all pros. And as Jeff and I have said, that was the guy who scared us. We weren't thinking about Jared Allen. We weren't thinking about Pat Williams, maybe a little bit about Antoine Winfield, but that was the guy. Kevin Williams was the guy when it was Vikings week. That was the guy we were thinking about. Speaking of Vikings week, speaking of Eagles week, Randall Cunningham. Randall Cunningham has after this year, I mean, for us, he's got 3 years left. For the real group, he has 2, and we're about to have all these QBs, and I know we view QBs differently, but Randall Cunningham, he is the only player in NFL history with a major MVP award in 2 separate seasons who is not in the Hall of Fame, not counting Mahomes, Rodgers, Brady, etc.
3 separate seasons.
We have agreed as a group that the Burt Bell is not considered a major MVP award on the basis of its Philly slant. But
it is.
I say that he has 3 MVP level seasons.
Yes.
Because in 88, you got to be specific. He was in 88 with the Bell, but he also has 3 of the highest second place vote totals in the AP MVP. There are guys who get that second place and they got 1 vote. They got 2 votes. They got 5 votes. Randall Cunningham was getting 16, 20, 25. He was getting these big chunks of numbers. And the peak, super high. We've talked about the comparison of players, the offensive players that he had in Philly versus the offensive players that Jim Kelly had in Buffalo, that obviously Troy Aikman had in Dallas. And then what Randall's numbers looked like when he went to Minnesota, and he had more all-pro players on offense in that 1 year than he had in his entire career in Philly. I mean, in Philly, it was him, and in terms of prime guys, Keith Jackson, because Mike Quick was already down, and I love Fred Barnett, but Fred Barnett wasn't Randy Moss, Chris Carter. He wasn't Michael Irvin. I always think about how when Troy Aikman took the field in any given game, he sometimes had the MVP of the league. He had the best offensive line. He had in most games, he had the best wide receiver. In most games, he had the best fullback. In most games, he had the best tight end. In most games, he had the best defense. Troy Aikman was dope, but it is easier to be that when you have all that. And Randall is a guy who never had a teammate finish above him in the MVP voting or the Offensive Player of the Year voting. And a lot of these quarterbacks who are in the Hall, I just don't think you can separate it. They all had guys they had teammates who won those awards. Joe Montana had 2 separate teammates who won Offensive Player of the Year. Steve Young had that. John Elway had that. Phillip Rivers, who's going to be coming up soon, he had that. So that to me is Randall. It is what he did. It is the impact. And, people want to say, oh, well, it's just these few seasons. In those few seasons, what he did was something no one has ever forgotten.
So let's talk about Randall for a moment. He's unique in a lot of ways. To your point, Jack,
Amen.
he's the only one that we're talking about here that was a 3-time AP MVP runner-up. He's the only one that's won multiple major MVP awards at, by the way, easily the most important position in the game. Like, full stop. If we say it's anything other than quarterback, we are wrong, and we all know that to be true.
Oh, yeah.
When you talk about offensive teammates, Jack, to your point, that made the Pro Bowl, we talk so much about supporting cast. Randall Cunningham didn't have that. His coaches were Buddy Ryan, who didn't care about the offensive side of the ball. He frankly did it, and Rich Kotite. If we're going to talk about context and say, like, hey, these guys were able to win and they elevated their team, look at what Randall elevated. He had 11 times an offensive teammate in his entire career made the Pro Bowl, to your point earlier, Jack. 6 of them were in Minnesota in 98. So that's 5. He had 4 seasons. He was the leading rusher on his team. Even Keith Byers, the one time he had like a big season was when he got shipped off to Miami. And when you think about Randall, he's the only quarterback that we're talking about here in the 25. He's the only one that did it at the highest level, at the most important position in the game. When we look at the league today, you see Randall Cunningham's influence everywhere. Randall Cunningham in some ways walked so Jalen Hurts could soar and fly like an eagle. He was called the ultimate weapon for a reason.
Amen.
Go ahead.
I could talk about from the Falcons' perspective. even as a New Yorker. A I don't think Michael Vick would have been drafted #1 by Atlanta if Randall Cunningham did not have the amazing seasons he had with the Eagles and with the Vikings. A lot of people talk about, oh, Michael Vick changed the game, this or that. Michael Vick would not be able to do what he did if Randall Cunningham was able to. And the thing, unlike Vick, Cunningham had an arm. Like my dad would even say, like even seen like in the old Eagles games, like what Cunningham had that someone like Aikman, who he was never a fan of, had was that he had an arm. He was able to make chicken salad out of whatever kind of decrepit chicken that he can have. Like he would, Aikman had everything he possibly can, and was in his eyes more as a game manager. But Cunningham was the show in town, and he said that even in the '90s, he was the star in the league, like the face of the league almost. He said it almost was like.
And let me say something else here before I forget. Here's a key number of times with a season with more interceptions than touchdowns. Brett Favre, 6. Warren Moon and John Elway, 5. Troy Aikman, 4. Jim Kelly, 3. Jack, you want to guess how many times Randall Cunningham had more interceptions than touchdowns in the season?
Well, I'm pretty sure I gave you that stat, so you go right ahead.
I don't think so, but it is 0.
That was 0. To be fair, that was 0 in a full in what was considered a full season. I cut out that Dallas year and some of the things like that. All right,
that's right.
Let's not empty our clips completely here.
Also, too, when we're talking about Cunningham. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. Randall got 13 votes. I mean, we have him 5th. We've had him in the semis. I think 2 of our 3, or in the finals, 2 of our 3 years. So I want to get.
We've had him in the finals.
It's 10:30. We hit 90 minutes. But we started a little late, so we got a little bonus time. So there's some guys.
Did we do Tom Nalen yet? Jack,
no, we haven't done Tom Nalen. I think everybody knows the Nalen thing. We don't have any other centers. These are the guys I want to get to who we haven't gotten to yet, because we also have running backs, but we had our whole big running back show where Ricky Waters ended up 1st, Sean Alexander ended up 2nd, Priest Holmes ended up 3rd. So we've got Waters, we've got Alexander. 2 guys we haven't talked about yet. And I kind of want to hear, like, how badly do we want them into 15 so that we can have one more conversation? And the first one is Ben Winter Coates.
Oh, before Cornelius Bennett, bias much.
Yeah, I know who he is. He follows me on Twitter.
Ben Coates?
No, Cornelius Bennett follows me on Twitter.
So Ben Coates, here's my thing. I'll be fast. I'm surprised that he doesn't get any attention as well. I do think it's important to look at positional breakdowns. And I do think it's important to say, this person was the best or almost the best at what he did for a sustained period of time. 1990s tight ends, at a time when the tight end was still a little bit more of what you might think a tight end is supposed to be. It wasn't just a pass catcher, because Tony Gonzalez hadn't changed it quite as much. Even Shannon Sharp didn't have like the crazy numbers that Gonzalez, Gates, Gronkowski had. Shannon Sharp, #1, and then the 2 and 3, depending on your view, are Keith Jackson and Ben Coates. To me, I think Ben Coates should be in the final 15. I think we should give him a longer shake. 1,000-yard season. Drew Bledsoe's #1 target. I mean, even when he had Terry Glenn going down the field, Ben Coates was still the guy who he was looking for in the biggest situations. You look at some of the more like superficial aspects. He's got a Super Bowl ring. It was in Baltimore. He was backing up Shannon Sharp, but he's got it. He also has a Super Bowl appearance as a starter in New England. I just think, I don't understand how Ben Coates is not getting that attention. I would like us to give him that attention. I personally feel strongly about Ben Coates. But when we did our 5-year exercise, I was the only person to vote for Ben Coates. So, and I ended up, I think, giving that vote away to put toward someone else because the numbers weren't there. So, can I hear anybody else? Am I crazy? Can someone please tell me?
No. I wouldn't go that far with Ben Coates.
Tell me I'm right, or someone.
I don't think you're wrong at all with Ben Coates. I wish you had Evan here.
Siobhan, I haven't heard from Siobhan in a bit.
Okay.
I agree with you on the Ben Coates thing. Now, granted, he didn't exactly drop jaws per se in terms of receiving numbers, as we all know.
Right.
But at that point in time, what Shannon Sharp ultimately became was like an H-back. And Ben Coates was like still the old school, hand in the dirt, be like the nasty big blocking kind of tight end that a lot of teams back in the day were used to seeing. Granted, there were a few exceptions. For example, when you think about when you think about the Steelers in the 70s, Randy Grossman was a pass catcher. The 80s, we had the Bears with Emery Moorhead. He did a lot more granted, he had to run block because they had Walter Payton, but whenever he caught the pass, it was somewhat impressive. The Cowboys in the 90s had Jay Novacek. And Ben Coates, of course, with Drew Bledsoe being the target. And people forget, Terry Glenn, the Patriots didn't even want Terry Glenn to begin with. They wanted Tony Brackens.
Well, what does that have
Bobby
to do?
Greer overruled it. And still, despite all that, Ben Coates was still the big target, even though he's like more of a run blocker. When he went to Baltimore, he only had 9 catches total for that season. I think he played 9 games. I can't remember the exact number there.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't a big shit in Baltimore. But I mean, we're gonna get to a point where someone's gonna be saying, well, LaShawn McCoy's a 2-time champion. So I just think,
Well, sure, but like Jack,
to your point about Ben Coates, you're looking for reinforcement here. Like,
I'm wondering,
yeah,
because I'm wondering, because I always looked at him and I was like, this is one of the.
I'm trying to say, like, sometimes we focus so much on the stats and maybe not enough on the damn eyeball test. When I saw Ben Coates in the 90s, granted, this is coming from a kid's perspective, Jack, right? Like, we're in the same age range, we're old, but we're not that old. When I saw Ben Coates, he was elite in his era. And when I look at him and his ability as a pass catcher, he was the security valve. He was the safety blanket, but also a big-time weapon for Drew Bledsoe in that passing game. Like, the Patriots don't get to the Super Bowl in 96 without Ben Coates there, period. And if I recall correctly, there was even a piece around, Ben Coates was one of the featured athletes. There was even like a big mural down there in New Orleans for that Super Bowl, and Ben Coates was the one that was featured on. So, like, if you think about guys at their position, Coates gets stuck similar to your point, Jack, about Keith Jackson in terms of their position and their numbers are getting viewed from a modern lens when they weren't playing a truly modern lens. Like, to stack his numbers up against a Tony Gonzalez, even a Shannon Sharp, and the way Sharp was utilized in Denver, it's unfair. But I think when you talk about, like, was this guy elite for an extended period of time, I would say 5 to 6 years of his career, Ben Coates was a top flight tight end in the NFL.
All right. Cornelius Bennett.
I'll go.
Go.
Yes. 27 fumble recoveries is 4th all time among players that aren't quarterbacks. And when you exclude returners like Rod Woodson and Kermit Alexander recovering some of their own fumbles, that all counts. You're talking about defensive players. Cornelius Bennett is 4th all time in fumble recoveries. He's a 5-time Pro Bowler. He was a 2-time UPI AFC Defensive Player of the Year. And you say, well, it's a conference Defensive Player of the Year. He won that in 88 and 91. 4-time winner, Bruce Smith. 3-time winners were Reggie White, Lawrence Taylor. 2-time winners of that award, Jack Lambert, Mike Singletary, Charles Haley. Outside of Haley, every single one of those guys was a first ballot Hall of Famer. Yet Cornelius Bennett has kind of slipped through the cracks here. He was all rookie team, 1990s, all decade second team. And if we talk about, like, appearing in big games and being a big time player, you thought about Bruce Smith, certainly with those great Bills defenses of the 90s. You thought almost equally about Cornelius Bennett. And even though he never won a ring, I think it is important to call out, he wasn't just a guy on teams that played in 5 Super Bowls. He was a big time damn deal. 4 times with the Bills, and even in 98 in his mid-30s when he's playing a slightly different position as a strong side backer in Atlanta, like, he was still a solid quality starter there. So he's got some of the postseason accolades, some of his numbers measure up. He gets hurt a little bit, I think, because of his sack totals. But when you talk about Biscuit, he wasn't just a guy you sent at the quarterback. He was so good in run support. He was solid in coverage. He could do it all compared to some of his other peers. And I think it's been a crime that he's just kind of went by the wayside, especially when we focus just on the football aspects.
Got it. All right. Anybody else? Cornelius Bennett? Anybody feel
Follows me on
strong?
Twitter.
Anybody feel strongly that he should not be in the 15 and we shouldn't have a conversation about him moving forward? Anybody like a hard no on Cornelius Bennett? All right. So let's get to the voting, and I would like to move along unless there are any objections. We've got 9 players who have 12 plus votes. The tough thing is that we don't have like that really clear-cut ledge that we usually have where the votes just drop off the table. So here are the 9: Julius Peppers, Torrey Holt, Antonio Gates, Andre Johnson, Randall Cunningham, Richmond Webb, Steve Wisniewski, Eric Allen, Darren Woodson. So 9, we still have room for 6.
6 more.
Is that cool? Anybody object to moving those 9 over?
Can you drop the names in the chat or screen share so we could see? I'm sorry, I just wanted to see them.
Sorry, yep, absolutely. So they are, and I'll read them again for the listeners, and we appreciate listeners, viewers. So they are Julius Peppers, Torrey Holt, Antonio Gates, Andre Johnson, Randall Cunningham, Richmond Webb, Steve Wisniewski, Eric Allen, Darren Woodson, and these guys had between 12 and 16 votes.
No objections.
It's not a bad list, actually. That makes sense. Those guys got that many votes, Chad. Like, you got no argument from me.
Yeah, I want all those guys. I want all those guys, obviously. But yeah, those are all very deserving people. I hope they make it in the real deal one very soon.
Okay, so that's 9. Let's take. I would like to do a yes/no on McDonald and O'Neill, and then we can kind of address them a little bit more on their merits when we get to the finalists. We're not going to vote them in just because they're in their 20th year, but I personally feel like we've said they have strong cases. I'd like to hear more. So, show of hands, just put your hand up, yes or no on Tim McDonald. Hand up is yes. Okay, that's everybody. I can't see Ron. Ron, yes or no on Tim McDonald?
There's a yes. The hands up.
Ron raises hand. Bill, Paul's in. Bill?
I think everyone has their hand up for Tim McDonald.
Sounds good. All right, hands down. So Tim McDonald is our number 10. So Leslie O'Neill, hands up for yes. This is just for the 15.
Ron also has a hand up, by the way.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we move these guys over, and we move O'Neill over, and we move to McDonald over. That is 11. Now the other guys with 11 votes, let's see. We've got Waters, Freeney. Well, we can remove O'Neill. And Kevin Williams. Do we just want to do a straight vote for the final 4 spots and see what comes up?
Yeah, I think might as well.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so we are voting on. I'll put it in the chat, and these are listed in order of how we voted for them initially.
You want us to DM you all of them, or do you want us to have them all publicly?
DM me your 4, and I will tally them up.
Okay.
So here's who we're voting. Here's who we're voting on: Ricky Waters, Dwight Freeney, Kevin Williams, Tom Nalen, Willie Anderson, Jared Allen, Neil Smith, Cornelius Bennett, Sean Alexander, Rodney Harrison, Ben Coates, Lomas Brown, Reuben Brown, Simeon Rice, and here is our positional spread. So far, we have 2. We have, yes.
Is Richmond Webb part of that group?
Richmond Webb is advanced.
He's advanced. Okay.
Yeah, he's advanced.
So in terms of the positional spread, we have 2 pass rushers, we have 2 wide receivers, we have 1 offensive tackle, we have 1 offensive guard. We don't have a center, so we have 2 of our 5 offensive linemen. We have a quarterback, we have a tight end, we have 2 safeties, We have one corner. So send me your 4, please.
Okay.
Except
While
mine.
everyone's sort of doing
And while
that,
this is going on, Kirk, take it away.
yeah, if I could, just to sort of like say, first off, sorry about how this sort of opened up. That's me. Whamp whamp. Saying that, moving forward, thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you all for just what has become something that I really love to do. Discussing the Pro Football Hall of Fame, really all halls of fame, has been something very passionate for me. That all of you are a part of this is great. Meeting a whole lot of other people has been fantastic. Other things that I get to do in what I like to call the Bucknerverse. Jack, if you can sort of like allow me to sort of like promote some stuff. There's a show that I do with Vinny Lospinuso, who is a guest here. Vinny and I, Vinny does a show called Vinny Makes the Hall of Fame Case 4. And it's been a real fun show for me personally also. Not just for Vinny, but because we have been looking at some interesting people, or Vinny really looks at them. And sometimes I'll make a request here and there. And my favorite part is that some of the people who are related to the people that Vinny has made the Hall of Fame case for has reached out to him. And, you know, through that, we've been able to get, well, really Vinny, I mean, I shouldn't take credit for it because Vinny's done all the work for that, obviously, to get people into various state halls of fame and other things. And it's a really big thing for me. So thank you, Vinny, for being a part of that.
I appreciate it. I'll see if I can try to get Din Man hooked up with you. For those that are wondering, Din Man is the grandson of Houston Astros founder, former mayor of Houston, and creator of the Astrodome, Roy Hofheinz, who I can now say is a member of the 2024 class of the Texas Sports Hall of Fame.
But you were part of that, and like that's sort of like really what I was sort of like talking about. You've done such incredible work, and I'm really proud that in a small little way I've been a part of that. Other things that we sort of do here in notinhalloffame.com, some other shows that I've got that's really not Hall of Fame related, but I thought I'd sort of like promote that. I've got a show called How the Hell Was This a Hit? Where we look at really crappy songs and ask, how the hell was this a hit? I think some people here would be a great guest on that. Bill, I'm looking at you, buddy. I think you'd be a great guest for some of those. The next one we're looking at, probably recording tomorrow, is What Did the Fox Say?
Oh, I remember when that song was big back when I was my freshman in high school. It was like,
yeah, the rest of us were all old, but yes.
It was just so annoying when it was going on. I thought it was like a sequel to Gangnam Style based on just how crazy and everyone was singing it everywhere. And
right.
But at least Psy still has his long time association with Korean pop and whatnot, and his influence. I mean, that was just like a comedy duo, really. That's all they were.
Well, there you go. Well, tomorrow I'm going to answer, what did the fox say? And apparently they said, I don't know what the hell they said. They said a bunch of crap, but I'm going to look at that. Other shows that that we do, there's the weekly Hall of Fame show that I do with my regular partner who couldn't be here because he is kicking ass on an exam so that he's going to sort of like elevate his career. My good friend, Evan Nolan.
Nice.
But Chris Meridian will be my special guest host on Thursday. I'm hoping that Jeff's going to be a part of that. What do you say, Jeff?
Yeah. What? Watch out.
I'll be there.
You'll be there? Okay, great. So we're going to be sort of like looking at the latest Hall of Fame related news. Obviously, we're going to be reacting more specifically, in this case, to the Pro Football Hall of Fame and what they actually did do. The Baseball Hall of Fame, and a lot of Hockey Hall of Fame related news. I do a section called Elevator Up, Elevator Down, and my God, Corey Perry is taking an elevator down, let me tell you. Insert joke here.
Or Andre.
Yes, exactly, right.
Hey, Connor, your mom, I like your mom.
Connor's mom has got it going on. I don't know.
Fun fact, actually, the people that sang the Stacy's Mom song are actually from here on Long
Island. And they also still suck.
I know.
the hockey player, because he was good at scoring goals, was called, Katy Perry and all that, was called Scory Perry as a nickname. And that has a real meaning today.
So fitting.
Nice.
He scored one, all right, but I think he scored his last potentially.
I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, just
We'll
think of
see. It's going to be interesting. There's also a bunch of other shows that are going to finally come out in December with my good friend Paul Lawrence. Paul and I, we've recorded a few shows over the summer where we do our retro football review. Actually, Ron, you were a guest on one of those, so we're looking forward to putting that out soon.
Yeah. Just so you guys know, when you watch the Super Bowl 12 thing, see how Pearson was completely shut down by Lewis Wright, who should be in the Hall of Fame, by the way.
How many times you mentioned that? There's another show that there's a few other episodes that are going to finally come out of that. It is the Classic Sports Review with Glenn Pulowski, the greatest triathlete ever to come out of Buffalo, who's currently defending that title in Antarctica. That's kind of serious. Where we look at some really interesting sports things that, well, I guess they're sports. I mean, we looked at roller derby. We looked at the disco demolition night. We looked at some really interesting things. And I'm really looking forward to a lot of the other things that sort of come out. Also on the site, the United States Athletic Hall of Fame, which some people here are a part of, that has put out their first ever class. We are trying to expand that and get some more people who are going to be part of that committee. Those who are a part of that, thank you so much. Currently, that site is www.notinhalloffame.com/USA, but we just got www.theUSAHOF.com. Makes a lot more sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, there
makes
we go.
sense to me.
All right, everybody. So votes are tallied, and I will read these from the bottom, just for the record. With 0 votes, Lomas Brown, Reuben Brown, Rodney Harrison. Wow. With 1 vote apiece, Willie Anderson, Simeon Rice. These guys are all eliminated. With 2 votes apiece, Sean Alexander, Jared Allen, Ben Coates. With 4 votes apiece, these guys are also eliminated. Cornelius Bennett, Neil Smith. Advancing with 5 votes, Dwight Freeney. Advancing with 8 votes, Ricky Waters. Advancing with 8 votes, Kevin Williams. Advancing with 11 votes, Tom Nalen. And that means your 2024 Not in the Hall of Fame finalists are Julius Peppers, Torrey Holt, Antonio Gates, Andre Johnson, Randall Cunningham, Richmond Webb, Steve Wisniewski, Eric Allen, Darren Woodson, Leslie O'Neill, Tim McDonald, Tom Nalen, Ricky Waters, Kevin Williams, Dwight Freeney. We ended up with 1, 2, 3 defensive ends. We ended up with 3 offensive linemen, 1 at each position. We ended up with 2 wide receivers, 2 safeties, 3 total DBs, 3 total pass catchers, 1 quarterback. That was good.
Yeah, I would say so. And it's a clean 15. And even to tell you how strong of a case Tom Nalen and Kevin Williams are, we didn't even need Tom and Evan here. That's how respected of cases they are. So unfortunately, you guys weren't able to be here, but don't worry. We took the mantle, and I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really, again, thank you all for being a part of this. Jack, thank you again. It made my life so much easier having you be the quarterback and me just being sort of like your lowly center. I hope I did a good enough job.
I won't say it until we stop recording. Go ahead, Kurt. Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, no. I mean, I appreciate you sort of like for waiting to sort of like take shots at me after, because usually it's during, but I appreciate that.
Are we out?
I don't know. I just thank Jack. Did we lose Jack?
No, I'm here.
No,
sorry, sorry, I'm
Jack's-
here. Thanks.
Jack's still here, and he still
Awesome.
kind of looks like me.
Awesome job. Awesome job. And under 2 hours, even with the tech break at the beginning. So I don't know. I count this as way under 2 hours. So good job. I think the better question is, did we lose Bill?
Nope, you didn't.
There he is.
No, Bill's still here. Ron's gonna be leaving soon because he's at his folks, his
Yep.
family.
All good. All right. Well, hey, appreciate everybody for jumping on. On a personal note, thank you to Jose and Jeremy for coming out. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, many thanks for coming here out. It's much appreciated. I guess we'll be doing this in I guess next year, huh?
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
yeah,
It's a
potentially.
pleasure to be on.
Mhm. It won't be the last time you'll be on. I'll see if I can work something with you, Jose, with Kirk a bit afterwards if you want.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Guys,
Absolutely, I
between
was
this
down.
and the senior pool, we only do 5 official 2-hour recordings per year, plus the running back one, plus eventually.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the great thing is now that I got Jack quarterbacking it all, it's relentless work for me. So this is sort of great because I can't corral anything.
Are we a wrap with the official episode, and now it's going to be free for all?
Yeah, now you can start swearing again, Jeff.
Yeah,
There
so
you
I was
go.
going to say
So-
first thing was